Wonderful. Okay, well, thank all of you for coming today. I am so excited to be here. I had an absolutely wonderful time yesterday hearing from some of the world's experts on this awesome period of time, the Cretaceous Paleogene boundary. Had a lovely evening with some of the friends of the museum, so this has just been a fantastic experience, and so thanks to Randy and everybody here that invited me, and I'm really excited to talk to you today about Earth's last dinosaur ecosystems. But before I do, I always like to sort of acknowledge those that are sort of the key contributors to my research. And here they are. These are some of the key people that have worked with me on this particular topic. We have Erica Evans and Gabriella Rossetto, who are both graduate students who've helped me a lot out in the field. We heard from Antoine Bercovici yesterday. He and I have been good friends for the last 15 or more years. He's a palynologist. Dean Pearson, you heard a little bit about yesterday. And then, of course, Kirk Johnson and Ian Miller. And we heard from Ian yesterday, who are team paleobotany. And what we try to do is work together as a team and integrate all of these different data sets, the plants and the pollen, and of course then the vertebrates, which is my specialty, into these high-resolution timelines for the last 1.5 million years of the Cretaceous to look at these patterns of extinction. And of course, many of you probably have seen this particular diagram. I know it was shown yesterday. You can see there in Earth's history, there have been 5 mass extinctions. And of course, we're going to be spending all of our time talking about Earth's last mass extinction, arguably the single worst day for life on Earth, or single worst day for life on Earth. But there have been 5 of these mass extinctions. You'll note on the bottom here that volcanoes, or these massive volcanoes, or these large igneous provinces, have been implicated in many of these mass extinctions, including the latest or end Cretaceous mass extinction. And I heard a lot of questions in the audience yesterday about wanting to know more about the Deccan. And that's what these are called. In this particular area, it's called the Deccan Traps. And so I thought, well, you guys need the answer, or at least the latest answer, shall we say. So I'm going to give you guys a bit of an update here. We know at this interval of time that a massive asteroid struck Earth. Struck off the Yucatan Peninsula. We heard some great talks about that yesterday, particularly Connie's talk about the drilling of the Chicxulub crater, absolutely fascinating. On the other side of the globe, here is India, sort of floating through the Indian Ocean, and this is where these giant volcanoes are going off, or these large igneous provinces. And it's floating over these hot spots, and you get these plumes, and that's what's creating this massive amounts of volcanic activity as it floats up into Asia there. And of course, there was the giant asteroid, right? We heard a lot about that yesterday. We heard about the drilling of the Chicxulub crater. So I think it's pretty safe to say that given that we have large volcanoes, a giant space rock, and dinosaurs, it kind of makes this the most interesting interval in Earth's history. Can we all agree on that? It's pretty awesome interval of time. So, but because of that, because there's these two big things, because there's dinosaurs, people are, of course, interested in dinosaurs, and because we know there are the giant igneous provinces going on and a giant rock from space that fell, there's been a lot of debate as to the cause of this mass extinction. Huge amount of debate. And I'm not going to go into super detail about this particular debate, but I will start with the last decade and try to bring everybody up to speed, at least with what's going on in this debate. So we can start here in 2010, a paper by Schulte et al. And some 40 plus co-authors. They brought together all these different data sets, the pollen and the plants and all the forams, and looked at the pattern of extinction. And they argued that the pattern of extinction looked like it was quite abrupt. It was catastrophic. And therefore they argued, like, hey, it was the meteorite. Done, right? Everybody can kick back, everybody can go home. No, of course, right on the heels of that, there were 3 replies to that paper. It was like, no, it wasn't just the asteroid impact. There was also other things going on, namely Deccan. And so it likely had a role in this mass extinction. And maybe there was sort of the 1-2 punch combo with the Deccan weakening these ecosystems and then the asteroid striking just over 66 million years ago, sort of the left hook that wiped out these ecosystems. Well, that was met with no. Actually, we don't really have a good date on the timing of the Deccan, so it was the asteroid. So sort of back and forth. And then, of course, more recently, there was a great paper by Paul Rennie and his group, and what they did is they provided a very precise date for the Cretaceous-Paleogene mass extinction. And so they moved that number from, what you may have heard, 65 million years ago to now just over 66 million years ago. And in this particular paper, they argued that the demise of the dinosaurs was likely the result of the meteorite impact, and that these Deccan Traps, or these large igneous provinces, likely had more to do with the post-extinction recovery, this recovery of the modern world after the mass extinction. So I stole this from my dear colleague Antoine Bercovici, but this is a great summary of the debate, you know. So that's 2013. So what are some of the challenges here, right? I mean, one of the main challenges of resolving this debate is the timing of the Deccan. When were they placed, right? When were they going off? Well, fortunately, a lot of folks are working on that. So Blair Shaney at Princeton, he and his team have been dating the Deccan Traps. So here you can just see what they look like in the outcrop. And then here you can see in purple just how large they are, how much area they cover. An important point that Julia and Ian brought up yesterday is how much is still in the ocean here. We don't really know. We know there was some, but we just don't have a good volumetric knowledge of how much is in the ocean. But other folks like Mark Richards at Berkeley, who I guess is now at the University of Washington, he looked at the volume of these particular Deccan Traps and broke them down into 3 phases. You have phase 1, and this is a volumetric rendering here. So phase 1, pretty small. Phase 2 is huge. It's like 75% or more of all the Deccan, and then phase 3. And so in this particular paper, they put phase 1 about 500,000 to 1 million years before the extinction of the dinosaurs. They put phase 3 at about 500,000 to 1 million years after the extinction of the dinosaurs. So, okay, well, that's good. But you'll notice, see, we're sort of in no man's land right here in terms of dates. You can see here, this is where they got good dates. But right here, we don't have any good dates. And this is sort of the spread of where the boundary could be in 2015. So this monster phase 2, which arguably it's the biggest, we still didn't know where to place the boundary. And then 2019, big year for Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary research. So here's a paper, again, by Blair Shaney and his group, and what he found, so here's the volumetric renderings of each of these pulses. So he found, of course, okay, here's the early pulses, your phase 1 plus a little bit of phase 2, and then up here you have, actually off the screen, your phase 3. Part of phase 2 is up here, but then this really big one, the Paleogene, is just before the Cretaceous-Paleogene mass extinction, which of course would implicate it as a potential cause for this mass extinction, right? It's right before the giant rock falls. So then they argued within about 50,000 years, actually. So it's like, okay, wow, we've come to a resolution, right? This is great. Flip the page of Science, same issue of Science. Courtney Sprain and her group placed that same thing, that same major pulse, just after the boundary. They agreed on everything else. The placement of these lower ones, the placement of these upper ones, were in 100% agreement, for the most part. I mean, it was quite remarkable how closely they aligned. And they were using different dating techniques. So that might be one of the reasons why they get a difference. There's a number of reasons why they might have a difference. But it's problematic, right? So here we are, right? Two great analyses published in 2019, the same issue of Science. One has it just before, the other has it just after. So now what, right? What do we do now with that? That places it at 50,000 years after. This one places it at about 50,000 years before. So what do we do? That's a tough nut to crack, for sure. Well, just 2 weeks ago, Shelley Hall at the Yale University, she and her team attempted to crack this nut. So what did they do? The first thing they did is they threw the kitchen sink of paleotemperature proxies at this particular interval of time. So these are all different ways of figuring out paleotemperature. And here they are plotted. Here's older rocks, here's younger rocks. If the curve goes up, that's a warming interval. If it goes down, then it's a cooling interval. And so you can just follow the red line there. That's the 60 points smoother there. But so they had all these analyses to figure out, okay, temperature. Okay, great. So now we have, in at least their estimation, a really good idea of what temperature was doing at this interval of time. And then they modeled it. So they had a number of climate models, and I'm not a climate modeler, so I'm just going to tell you what they found. But they had a number of different scenarios. So one scenario was where they had most of the Deccan occurring before and a little bit after. Another where it was about split, well before and then after, punctuated, mostly afterwards, and then a nice continuous distribution of the Deccan across the boundary. And then they asked the question, okay, we have this wonderful paleotemperature estimate based on all of these different proxies. Which one best fits? Which model best fits our paleotemperature data? And they found that it was this one right here, where it was one with 50%, which was before, and well before. So they argued that it was anywhere from 500,000 or more years before the extinction, and then the next pulse or major pulse occurred after the boundary, after the Cretaceous Paleogene boundary. So they argued that it was the meteorite and that the Deccan had more to do, again, with the post-extinction recovery. And that's something that we also found. Myself and Ian and Antoine, we published a paper recently in Science arguing the exact same thing, that the Deccan likely had more to do with the post-extinction recovery after the dinosaurs went extinct than it did with the extinction event itself. So, resolved, right? This is it. I think not, right? Of course, I've got my popcorn ready, and I'm ready to sit back and just watch the reply papers that are going to pop as a result of this. But I will say that it's been a really exciting time. We've come a long ways in the last decade of dating the Deccan. We've just come a long way. So some huge strides forward in this particular interval. So I think that's exciting. Okay, so another challenge to sort of disentangling these two hypotheses, the Deccan and multi-cause hypothesis versus the catastrophic meteorite cause for the extinction, or creating these detailed biotic patterns and putting those in a high-resolution framework. It's what a lot of people have done, right? We've heard a lot about that with the plants and the pollen, and so a lot of people do that. So. And this is basically what we want to look at. We want to look at the distribution of these things. You can put anything up here. Of course, I'm talking about dinosaurs, so that's what I'm looking at. But you want to know the distribution through time. And do all the animals go all the way up? And there's a nice abrupt catastrophic demise, which is predicted by the asteroid impact. Or does the distribution look more like this, right? Where you have different critters falling off before the asteroid impact, which is more in line or predicted by the multi-cause hypothesis, and including the Deccan Traps. So a lot of work has been done, and again, we heard a little bit about that yesterday. Most of what we know on land is from North America, and Antoine really hit on this yesterday. So of course we have 350, 400 boundary sections in the world. Most of those are in the ocean though. And then on land we don't have really any records outside of North America where we've got fossils going all the way up and then the primary markers of the impact, and then fossils right afterwards. There's usually, it's really annoying. There's just a little bit of missing rock usually on either side of the boundary. So most of the work of what we know comes from this particular area. And that's why the work of like Julia Clark and others who you heard from yesterday of developing these boundary sections with a great fossil record, with the primary markers in the southern hemisphere is so exciting, because when we have a great record like that, it's going to be another huge stride forward in this big debate. So here, this is the Williston Basin. This is where I've been doing a lot of my work. This is where I grew up, so that's my hometown right there, Marmarth, North Dakota. And a lot of people have come to this particular area to study this question because it preserves North America's last dinosaur ecosystems, T-Rex and your horned dinosaurs, Triceratops, Torosaurus, and duckbill dinosaurs going all the way up. So here's the boundary, and here's my team right here collecting a big Triceratops skull. It's one of the few places in the world where you can do that. Go and put your finger on the boundary and then have fossils above and below it. So makes it very, very important. So this is what it looks like. This is the outcrop. Vast exposures of outcrop in North Dakota, Montana, and South Dakota, which is great because you can go find a lot of fossils, but it's also a challenge, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that challenge here in a minute. But this is where I grew up. This was my backyard, and so basically, some of my earliest childhood memories are out running around looking for fossils, and you can see here I've been making amazing fashion decisions, for at least 25 years, right? Go Bulls, right? But this is in front of a Thesclosaur dinosaur that I found when I was in like 6th grade. So I was finding all these dinosaurs when I was a kid. It's just because it's so incredibly rich. And then I was working with all of these different scientists like Kirk Johnson, Dave Fostovsky. It's where I met Antoine. Everybody was flocking to this area because it's so rich in fossils, and then it has the primary markers for the Chicxulub impact, or the KPG boundary here. And so here's one particular locality, and Antoine already showed this slide, another slide that I borrowed from him. Thanks, Antoine. But it's really important because here we have the boundary, and in the boundary clay we've got iridium anomaly, we've got spherules, we've got the shock minerals, that Connie talked about yesterday, the quartz grains. It looked like a cat got a hold of them, and they're crisscrossed with marks. So we have all those markers here. And then over the years, we've been finding a whole bunch of fossil localities. So this is sort of a zoomed in area. Here's North Dakota, Montana. And then in red, you can see all of my vertebrate localities. In blue are the Antoine's pollen localities, and then in purple we have a lot of the plant localities of Kirk Johnson and Ian Miller. In this big area, it's about 475 square miles or kilometers. So we've been doing that, and then at the same time we've been trying to put together this high resolution temporal framework. And so we've done that a number of ways. These are some of our key sections where we've used a number of techniques like paleomagnetics and a number of different dating techniques to figure out the age of our rocks. Because what we want to do, it's quite simple. We want to build up a framework of time, and then of the last 1.5 million years of the age of the dinosaurs, and roughly the first million years of the age of the mammals. And then we want to find a bunch of fossils and figure out how they're distributed. So pretty simple, but it can be pretty difficult in practice. But we've been able to do that, and there have been a number of studies, and so I'll just kind of give you a brief overview of some of those studies. This is a study by Dean Pearson et al. And here he looked at little vertebrates, microvertebrates. So these microvertebrate assemblages are amazing. They provide thousands of fossils from these single localities. So each one of these is a single locality. And so he was just looking at vertebrates as a whole: turtles, crocodiles, dinosaurs. And basically what he wanted to look at was, are there changes from the bottom in numbers, in diversity, compared to the top? And what he found is there's really not a whole lot of change. Diversity is high at the bottom, and it's high at the top, which suggests more of a catastrophic demise. Ian talked about plants yesterday. This is largely the work of Kirk Johnson here. And here Kirk found the same thing. Plant diversity is high, and then it drops off quite suddenly at the boundary. From the plants, they're able to get temperature, which may be related to Deccan. And then from the plants, you're also able to get insect damage. So get an idea of what's going on with the insects. And Antoine talked about that. So diversity is high at the bottom, it's high at the top, and then it drops off. So all of this suggests more of a catastrophic demise for Earth's last mass extinction event. But of course, we're analyzing all of these with these two hypotheses in mind. One is the Deccan, the other is the Chicxulub, because we know those are both happening at this interval. So, and you can see I just sort of cheated right here. I put that particular one right at the boundary. But so what about dinosaurs? So here we have the best, arguably the best place in the world to study this particular interval, particularly dinosaurs, the Williston Basin. It has the world's last dinosaur ecosystems. And so here they are. We've got duck-billed dinosaurs like Edmontosaurus. Here's Anzu wiley-eye, the chicken from hell. These horned dinosaurs, like Torosaurus and Triceratops. The big football helmeted dinosaurs, like Stygimoloch and Pachycephalosaur. And then, of course, we have T-Rex. So an amazing, amazing dinosaur ecosystem here. And so what I wanted to look at was, what is the distribution of just dinosaur skeletons? Other people have looked at microvertebrates and plants. What about the skeletons as a whole? And so that's what we'll talk about here. And basically what I wanted to look at is, how are they distributed? How are they distributed in time? And then particularly, what dinosaurs are found in that last 3 to 5 meters of the formation? Which would be right before the asteroid impact. Does the pattern look like this, which would implicate, an asteroid impact, or does the pattern look more like this, which might indicate more of a multi-cause hypothesis for the extinction? And then the other thing I looked at is where were the dinosaurs buried? Are they buried in mudstone, or are they buried in sandstone? Because those are, at the broadest scales, indicators of paleo environment. So are these dinosaurs distributed across the paleo landscape? If so, how? And then what does that say about the extinction? Because that's what we're interested in. So one of the challenges that I have is that dinosaurs are just really big, right? I mean, we all know that. But here's just the skull of a Triceratops. You can see the horn sticking out here and here, maybe the nasal horn there, and the frill back here, 6.5 feet long. It just takes, I'm always jealous of Antoine, right? Because Antoine gets his little thimble-sized bit of rock, dissolves it, 100,000 fossils, and he can go home for the day. And that's it. We go out, we find a dinosaur sticking out, we're all really excited, and then we spend the next 6 to 12 weeks excavating the dinosaur for a sample size of 1, right? So it takes a really long time to get a somewhat meaningful data set, but it's a lot of fun. So here's just another big dinosaur that we collected a few years ago. This was a quote-unquote mummified dinosaur that we collected in 2002. And so one of the challenges is just the size of the research area, right? I mean, Antoine can go and dig a column, collect his rocks within that column, dissolve them, look at the pollen. Dinosaurs are pretty rare, right? I mean, they're rare compared to pollen or plants. So we have to have a really big research area, again, to figure out, or to get a big enough sample size. And so again, 475 square kilometers, it's pretty big. And then the trick is again, placing all of those fossils in time over a giant area. Can't just do one column, right? I mean, that's one of the challenges. And so what we've done here is we've tried to date the rocks using a number of techniques from our entire research area here. These are some of our key sections. And then what we attempted to do was map we wanted to map the Cretaceous Paleogene boundary and then figure out how far above or below these dinosaurs and other animals, to figure out these patterns of extinction. How far above or below. And so what we did there is we were able to map out the formation contact between the Hell Creek Formation and the Fort Union Formation, because the Cretaceous Paleogene boundary is really, really darn close to this change in formation. Sometimes it's right at the change in formation. Other times it's not quite. But what this allows us to do, it provides a great field datum where we're able to go out on the outcrop and say, here's the formation contact. This is within a meter, the Cretaceous Paleogene boundary. So that's what we did, and we went out and we used a differential GPS to map out the formation contact. So here's the formation contact, here's the Hell Creek, sort of these grab dray mudstones. There's a lignite that separates it from the overlying Fort Union Formation. Fort Union Formation is very strongly banded, right, likely as a result of ponded water environments. And we did that for over 500 areas, 500 spots that span our entire research area. So we covered a lot of ground in a couple of years, with their differential GPS, which gives us very accurate X, Y, and Z. Z being the most important component for this. And so then we brought all of those data into GIS software, and we were able to map and interpolate the boundary. And so here's just a visualization of the boundary. So this is or I should say the formation contact, which closely approximates the boundary. And this is what it looks like. If you look really closely, you can see little red dots mixed in here. Those are some of our localities. And so that provides us a way to figure out how far either above or below the boundary we are. And we checked it a number of ways. I think the most fun way was just by visually checking it. So here we can see the boundary. We would expect these hills right here to be Fort Union Formation if the model's right. If it's way off, then those would probably be covered by this purple layer. But so we checked it visually, and sure enough, you can see that little hill there aligns there, that little hill aligns right there. We did this throughout our entire research area and found that the model actually held up quite well. So then we went out with the same differential GPS, and over the course of 3 years, mapped out all of our plant localities. Here we are in front of this big tree stump. We mapped in all of our dinosaurs, all of our plants, all of the Antoine's pollen localities, and you can see sort of the numbers that we had. And here's just, again, sort of the visualization of that entire research area, and you'll see these little red dots, and you don't expect you to see it, but by every red dot is a number with an error bar of how far below or how far above our localities are. So that allows us to then look at these detailed patterns of biotic change across the boundary. And so this is what I was looking at, dinosaur skeletons, at least for this particular study. But you can imagine we've used this for any number of other studies because we have the plants, we have the pollen, we have a nice timeline, we have all the vertebrates combined together. So this is what it looks like, the last dinosaur ecosystems. This is the distribution if we combine the entire Hell Creek together. And what you can see is that it's really dominated by these horned dinosaurs. So horned dinosaurs just completely dominate the assemblage, followed by duckbill dinosaurs, followed by thespelosaurs, and then T-Rex. And we can compare this to other areas. So the type area for the Hell Creek Formation is here in Jordan, and they've been working in this area for years and years. Some of the most famous dinosaur skeletons, T-Rexes and others have come from this particular area. And here's what they found. They found a much more even distribution of dinosaurs. So only about 40% of the whole Hell Creek is made up of horned dinosaurs. And then shockingly, the second most common dinosaur is T-Rex in their particular area, whereas it's the fourth most common in our particular area. So I think that's an interesting pattern. If we look at the distribution then through time in our particular area, so again, the last 1.5 million years of the Cretaceous, we've done that for the 4 most common dinosaurs that we have, where we have a pretty good sample size. The most important thing to notice is that all 4 of these dinosaurs are found in the upper 3 to 5 meters of the formation contact. So I found a horned dinosaur that was a mere 5 centimeters below the boundary. I found a duckbill that's within a meter of the boundary, and then a T-Rex and a thespelosaur dinosaur that's within 3 to 5 meters, which would suggest more of a catastrophic demise. If we look at the distribution through time, sort of bin everything, we can see some pretty distinct changes from the bottom of the Hell Creek Formation, which again is about 1.5 million years before the extinction of dinosaurs, to the top, where duckbills are much more common down here. And then there's just this slow takeover of horned dinosaurs as you move up section, from 31% to whatever that number is there, 70+%. So we can then add that to sort of these other patterns that have been noted from this particular area. what the changes in the plants, the changes in temperature right here. And it's, sort of tempting to align these with these different biozones that Kirk Johnson and others have developed in this area, that these changes align, that maybe these changes in the food structure are driving the changes in these dinosaur ecosystems. But I think a better explanation is actually the lithology, where the dinosaurs were buried. And so here's just showing the distribution of dinosaurs found in mudstone, or the type of dinosaur, and if they're found in mudstone in blue or sandstone in orange there. And you can see there's a really strong pattern for certain dinosaurs to be found in certain types of sediment. Horned dinosaurs are pretty much only found in mudstone. Duckbill dinosaurs are largely found in sand. Same thing with Thescelosaurs. T-Rexes are largely found in both. Another way of looking at it is just the distribution of dinosaurs relative to sandstone and mudstone. Duckbills dominate sandstone. Horned dinosaurs dominate mudstone. So there seems to be this really strong pattern with dinosaurs only being found in certain lithologies. So that, combined with the fact that these lithologies can broadly be categorized into channel environments. So sand is largely river margins or channels themselves, so sort of riparian environments. And then mudstone can be largely grouped into these floodplain environments, which I think makes a fair bit of sense. And so we can use that then to argue that there's some spatial niche partitioning going on with these dinosaurs in the latest Hell Creek, with the duckbill dinosaurs and Thescelosaurs largely being found in these riverine environments, these riparian environments, and then horned dinosaurs being found more in the floodplain environments. And then T-Rex, it's this ecosystem's sole large carnivore. It eats meat and it goes sort of wherever it wants. So it's equally found in river environments or in floodplain environments. I think that makes a lot of sense because this dinosaur ecosystem at the very latest Cretaceous in the Hell Creek Formation had a lot of really large plant-eating dinosaurs. Duckbills, the horned dinosaurs, the dome-headed dinosaurs. And so you can compare that to modern day ecosystems here. One that's pretty familiar probably to a lot of us. And in this ecosystem, there's a lot of pretty large herbivores here. Of course, not as large as the dinosaurs. But these modern ecosystems, of course, are all they're all separated. They're all doing different things to reduce competition, right? For limited resources, food and water. So you have animals that come out during the day, others at night. You have different feeding strategies. You have animals in the highlands versus the lowlands, and even in the lowlands, you have them separated out. And again, this is all just to reduce competition for food and water and other limited resources. So you could argue, based on that, which I have, that these dinosaurs, these mega herbivores at least, are spatially separated in the Hell Creek Formation, with your horned dinosaurs being more in the floodplain environments, and then these other herbivores being found in your riverine environments. Okay, so what does that mean? I mean, in terms of extinction then, let's get back to that and wrap it up. It's widely known that the Hell Creek Formation is much sandier at the bottom. Numerous scientists, anybody who works in the Hell Creek knows that the bottom of the Hell Creek is sandy, the top of the Hell Creek is muddy. You can even see that in this lithologic log here. These are all sands, and then you have mudstones up here. So basically, this is sampling more of these riverine environments. And so you have duckbills. You're more likely to find duckbills lower down, and higher up, you're more likely to find these horned dinosaurs, which we think is a result of changes in these base level changes. There was a large scale, the Western Seaway was sort of moving out, from the pure shale formation, which some of you might be familiar with, these big ocean environment. And then the Hell Creek here, we think is deposited during these small scale transgressions. So you have sandier at the bottom, muddier at the top, and then more of a transgression here when you get these ponded water environments right after the KPG boundary. So what that means is that a lot of these areas where you have the KPG boundary preserved, they're muddy. So this is an area that's called mud buttes. because it's largely mudstone. And because of that, the probability of even finding some of these dinosaurs that are largely found in sandstone is pretty low. Not because they weren't there, but simply because their environments were not there because of the changes in sea level. So I think we have a number of conclusions here. We can say that there are indeed these changes from the bottom of the Hell Creek, the last 1.5 million years of the age of the dinosaurs, to the top. There's definitely these distinct changes, but our most common dinosaurs are all found in that upper 3 to 5 meters of the Hell Creek, which means it's right below the KPG boundary. We're talking tens of thousands of years before the KPG boundary, which suggests more of a catastrophic demise. Of course, I wish we had a larger sample size for some of these other dinosaurs, but as we know, I mean, we're lucky when we have, with dinosaurs, a sample size larger than 1 or 2. And it's the same in the Hell Creek. So there's not a lot of anzus known and a lot of the pachycephalosaurs. So I think we just have to, common theme of this particular conference is that we have to get out and continue to gather more data. But I would certainly say that our data set so far, from the plants, from the pollen, from even this particular data set, all suggests that the extinction was catastrophic as a result of the meteorite impact. And then the last thing is that at least in the Hell Creek, these dinosaurs are strongly correlated with lithology, or the type of rock, mudstone versus sandstone. And so the absence of some of these animals might be the fact that there's changes as you go from the bottom of the Hell Creek to the top of the Hell Creek. So with that, I'm going to leave you with this visualization of this plane that we've made of the Cretaceous Paleogene boundary. So this is our full 475 square kilometer research area. This colored area here is the interpolated KPG boundary surface. And then you might be able to see some little red dots in there, all of our different dinosaur and other localities that we've collected over the last 25 or so years. So with that, I got a lot of landowners to thank, the BLM, who generously provide access to their land. And I thank all of you guys for your attention, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions that you guys might have. Thank you.
Wait for the microphone.
Yep. And please wait for the microphone. There'll be a microphone that'll be passed around for those people with questions. So.
Has anybody in that area been working with shed teeth from the dinosaurs?
Yeah, absolutely. So shed teeth, that's a great fossil set. So that microvertebrate data set that I talked about early on by this colleague of mine, Dean Pearson, he looked at shed teeth. Because of course they are going to have a much better fossil record than skeletons. And what he showed was that the diversity was high at the bottom, it was high at the top, which I would argue is it's just a better data set than skeletons. The skeletons can show you some other interesting patterns in terms of where the animals were living, but probably says less about extinction patterns themselves. So the shed teeth, yes, and they suggest more of a catastrophic demise.
Yeah, one thing did bother me. I remember it was either in the late 60s or the early 70s. I believe it was published in Science. Someone had discovered in creek formations, creek bottom formations, shed teeth. They were estimating. You're obviously much better on the time scale now than then, but they were finding teeth that were several million years after the KT, as it was understood then.
Right. Yeah. For sure. I mean, that's been a common thing in our field. I mean, even in Tom Williamson might talk a little bit about this, but even more recently, there have been arguments that there are some of these Paleocene dinosaurs, dinosaurs above the Cretaceous Paleogene boundary. The problem with dinosaur teeth is that for this particular question, is that they're very robust and they're easily reworked. So the idea for any dinosaur above the boundary, and trust me, I've been looking. I've spent, in this particular area walking the formation contact, and we found dinosaurs in the Fort Union Formation, which is largely Paleocene in age. Get excited, do the pollen analysis, and they all come back to be Cretaceous. So there's no good evidence of a dinosaur found in the ground in situ that hasn't been reworked. That's above the boundary. So it just doesn't exist. But it pops up every so often, and I'm sure it will continue to pop up.
Okay, so if I can repeat it in my mind,
Mm-hmm.
there was abundant amount of light before the impact, and then of course we're told that life basically disappeared for an amount of time, and then during that phase, the Deccan phase, that there was an abundance of life after that. Is there a way to find out if there's sulfur being pushed up into the atmosphere, and as this meteor impacted, is there a way to detect whether or not there is an abundance of sulfur or any sort of ejecta in that boundary line, and whether or not that contributed to the early death or demise of dinosaurs,
Right.
or whether it increased the life? And then the second thing that I have in my mind is, what a coincidence, an incredible coincidence that these two factors were happening on the planet at the same time. And I can't believe that a meteor that large could still impact the eruption of volcanoes on the opposite side of the planet.
Right.
But here we are now, pretty aware of what was going on in nature.
Yep.
And it must have increased the abundance of life. And if it wasn't for those two things, I wonder what would have come out.
Yeah, so my colleague Ian Miller, he talked a bit about the recovery afterwards. So just in terms of the timeline, yes, we have an abundance of life going up, dinosaurs, these rich plant ecosystems, and then we know there's a mass extinction. But some things survive. They have to, right? Some mammals survive, but something like 70 to 80% of mammals go extinct. Most birds go extinct. 57 to 75% of plants go extinct. But then Earth does rebound. It slowly comes back, and that's a paper that a record that we just published on from the Denver Basin that showed sort of how and when Earth rebounded. So we've worked on that. Tom Williamson, who's in the crowd here, has worked on that for his whole entire career. So we know that. And so in terms of a sulfur, yes. So where the asteroid struck, it was right off the Yucatan Peninsula. It essentially hit a reef. The shallow water reef, and it dissolved that reef, and it sent up all these aerosols, these sulfate aerosols, into the atmosphere. And it turns out that was where it hit, and because of these aerosols, might be the reason that it was so catastrophic. Because that's always been one of the arguments. Like, well, we know it would have been bad in North America because we were right in the blast shadow of the impact. But why the southern hemisphere? Why did things go extinct in the southern hemisphere? And it turns out that where it hit was really, really important because it hit this reef, which are rich in these sulfates, and those have a longer lasting time in the atmosphere, and that's what blocked out the sun. You block out the sun, interrupt primary productivity in the oceans and on land. Again, with the sulfur aerosols and whatnot, it's thought that the oceans were acidified, basically turned to acid. There's a paper published just last year that the oceans likely turned to acid as a result of that particular thing. And then in terms of the coincident, yeah, I mean, right? It's crazy. It's crazy that we have these three things aligning, which again makes it the coolest interval of time: giant volcanoes, an asteroid, and dinosaurs. But we know the Deccan, based on a lot of work, that the Deccan was going off well before the extinction of the dinosaurs throughout the very, very latest Cretaceous. And it's been implicated in some of these warming intervals. But most of the data suggests that these ecosystems did quite fine. We're adjusting to those intervals, that warming interval, and that there's a catastrophic demise, and then still that most of the Deccan occurred right afterwards. And there was a couple papers that suggested it was actually the asteroid impact that hit that caused a state change in the Deccan, and sort of because there's a difference in the chemistry, and there was a huge pulse in volume. So they sort of linked, they speculated because the timing is still tough to know, but the asteroid impact, then on the opposite side of the globe, you have India floating there, right? And that created this state shift in these Deccan pulses, which increased the volume. But we still don't really know about that one particular big pulse, the Pladper. Was it just before or was it just after? So, and in terms of volcanoes, I think the big thing that people look at is mercury. And so people have looked at that all over the world, and they certainly see that particular signal. But then the question is what is the response of life going all the way up to that mercury line? Yeah, so, but great question.
Thank you for coming, first of all. That was really interesting.
Yeah, thank you.
So, of course, as you said, the Deccan was exceptionally intense. But do we pay a lot of attention to it because it is at the same time or approximately the same time as the asteroid impact? Or what was it like relative to earlier volcanic events in the Jurassic and the Cretaceous? Like, how did it compare to them?
Well, I think we pay attention to it just because it's been, these giant volcanic igneous provinces have been implicated in all these other mass extinction events. There have been 5, and volcanoes seem to play an important role in some of these others. And what's different, I guess, is that those mass extinction events are they're more protracted. They're over tens of thousands of years, or like the end Permian seems to be pulsed. There seems to be 2 main pulses of that mass extinction. So I think that's why we pay attention. We want to know what caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. And we can't ignore the Deccan, right? I mean, it's definitely going on during this latest Cretaceous interval. Really, really important factor. But we also now know with absolute certainty that there was a giant asteroid. It just seems like most of the data suggests more of a catastrophic demise. But I think the jury's still out on a lot of this. We need good records from the southern hemisphere. That's going to be a huge step forward in this particular debate. But a lot of the ocean records, so we do have ocean records from the southern hemisphere. We have limited plant data and pollen data, so we have at least some of those records. They all indicate the same pattern, which again is just more catastrophic. So still a lot of work to be done though. No more Deccan questions? Oh man. So with all the questions yesterday, and everybody had said, oh, well, Tyler's going to cover that. And I was like, oh man, sounds like I'll be covering a lot. So.
Describe what we think the Deccan volcanism did to the atmosphere of the Earth. Could you repeat that?
Describe what we think the Deccan did to the atmosphere.
Well, some have argued that it will create more of a cooling aspect, and others have argued that with some of the CO2 and whatnot, and that it releases in the atmosphere, that it might cause more of these warming intervals. It sort of depends, It was interesting in those 2 papers that were just published in 2019 on the timing. Of course, they both had temperature, and they were both trying to align their Deccan pulses with their temperature curve, and they sort of had different, climate's complicated is basically what I read when I was reading those 2 papers. That sometimes can do cooling, sometimes it can do warming, and each were sort of trying to shoehorn the data that they were getting in the pulse when the pulses were occurring with the paleotemperature records. With this, and I'm not an expert in that by any means. I think Randy would be one that could answer more of those questions. But it is interesting that with this record that we just published in the Denver Basin, which is largely what happened after the mass extinction event, we recognize these 2 distinct, maybe 3 distinct warming intervals right afterwards, which seem to align quite well with these pulses, the Deccan pulses. So they might recognize, it might support, the idea that they're at least influencing climate and warming it. But the latest 2020 paper, ours was 2019, the 2021 didn't show these warming intervals afterwards. So, yeah.
I want to ask a turtle question, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
So I know there's big debate on where turtles go, anapsid versus diapsid, that kind of thing, and the diapsid side seems to be winning lately. And I'm just curious if you could talk about that. And the whole urea versus uric acid thing is always really interesting to me. I'm just Curious your thoughts on that.
You guys have another 45 minutes because I got another talk. We're going to just lock and load it and go, right? Yeah, that's what I did my PhD on was, basically who turtles are related to, how they got their shell, how they breathe. When you lock up your ribs into a shell, turtles are awesome. They're pretty amazing creatures. And yes, the overwhelming amount of data in the molecular world is diapsid, specifically Archosaurs, sister group to crocodiles and birds. And I have to be honest, I was quite skeptical of that when I first started, but now we're starting to find more and more fossils, which is great. I always like to see different data sets come together, consilience of the data sets, great hand-holding moment. And when they come together and they tell the same story, that's when I start to think like, well, maybe we're onto something. And so molecular data have been consistent in diapsids. And then more recently, we have some fossils, some of these really early proto-turtles before they have a shell. They have a diapsid skull. We're still not getting them with Archosaurs, but they're at least in the diapsid realm. And I just got an NSF grant to help further that question. So maybe in 3 years, I'll come back with my hour-and-a-half presentation. We can just talk turtles,
So I was just curious about what you said about ocean acidification past the boundary. And like with that data, is it based on like mollusk shells or anything? Because I know ocean acidification nowadays is really affecting mollusk shell formation and things like that. And so is there like a decrease in diversity of those animals?
There is, yeah, but they were looking at forams in the ocean. And it happened quickly. It happened quickly is the short of it. And I probably haven't read that paper as well as I should have. I just know the highlights of it. But that's what they were looking at. And they were arguing for, again, a pretty strong record going up to and then catastrophic demise afterwards. And then they had an expanded section. So they were able to look at these intervals that happened within days, weeks, of the impact. That's one of the things that we always hope to find, right? Or to get these ideas of the day the asteroid struck. And on land, that's just exceedingly rare. In the ocean, oceans always have a better fossil record. So.
There was something in the popular press just a couple of months ago about the discovery of a tsunami running up a river valley.
Yep.
That was the bad day.
Yes, so that discovery was right in my backyard. That was in North Dakota. So it's this locality called Tanis. And there they argued that they found, literally the day the dinosaurs died, this large seiche wave or this tsunami. And so in this deposit, they have what they claimed is to be a very diverse assemblage of animals. In the paper, they talk about the fish. So then they publish a paper, remarkable record, very robust results in terms of that they have a Cretaceous Paleogene boundary, and then they presented all these data on these amazing fish, completely articulated, and these spherules in the gills, and just a spectacular story. I'd say the only issue is that they haven't published the rest of the fauna. Of the animals and the plants. They talk to the press, they talk to the New Yorker, I guess, and they talk about feathers and pterosaur embryos and dinosaur footprints and fossilized skin, like the whole shebang in this one deposit. But they didn't publish on that. So a lot of us who work on this interval of time are just sort of waiting to see what comes next. I mean, it's really exciting. It's really, really exciting discovery, and looking forward to seeing what else that deposit has, because it really, I think, paints a really vivid picture of that particular day, provides incredible context, or could provide incredible context for the day that the asteroid struck. So. One right here.
Why is it called the Deccan Trap?
Oh man, I don't know actually. Do you know, Andy? Put you on the spot. As soon as you raised your hand, I got scared because the younger folks always have the hardest questions. So, yeah, in India. Yeah, so a place in India. That was going to be my guess, but it would have been a wild guess. All right, well, thank all you guys. Oh, we have one more?
Oh, yeah, one last question.
If so many of the mammals died, what factors led to the survival of the ones that did?
That's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I think invertebrates as a whole, we can look at that question. And that's something that we've done in this particular area. And I think one of the big selective filters is size. That's one of the key things, is if you're smaller, you have a higher probability of surviving the mass extinction. Another thing is where you live. If you're living either underground or in the water, you were likely buffered from this thermal pulse, which is one of the potential causes for the mass, at least one of the many causes of the mass extinction, because when the asteroid hit Earth, it created these thermal pulses, which essentially broiled the surface of the globe. So if you were underground, you were buffered from that, because you're buffered from that thermal pulse. So that seems to be another important selective filter. And then what you ate was obviously also very, very important. If you were a picky eater and you only ate meat or you only ate plants, you went extinct, essentially. That's largely what we see. So animals that do really well are turtles. Turtles are the winner of this extinction. If you only looked at turtles, you wouldn't know there was a mass extinction at this interval. Only really, we think, from the Hell Creek, 2 species of turtles go extinct, probably because they're plant eaters. But they also have a very generous diet. They're not picky. So even like a snapping turtle, we think eats meat, but 50% of its diet is detritus. It's just dead plant matter. So if you were eating detritus or dead plant matter, you were buffered from this selection. So I think those are the 3 most important factors that sort of allowed these animals to survive. And I think that holds whether you're a mammal or a turtle. But Tom might add more to that later. So Tom is our in-house mammal expert here. So we're going to hear from him in about an hour, I think. So great. Thank you, guys.